As authorities investigate the alleged Buffalo gunman's racist online posts, we're looking back at other recent attacks where white supremacy played a role. In 2015, a 21-year-old white man shot and killed 9 black people inside a church in Charleston, South Carolina. In 2017, a 20-year-old at a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, ran over and killed a counter-protester and injured many others. And more than 20 people were shot and killed by a 21-year-old white man at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas in 2019. That gunman targeted Hispanic people. These attackers all have a lot in common. They're young, white men with far-right views who've become radicalized. For more on this trend and what's driving it, I want to bring in Thomas Mockaitis. He's a history professor at DePaul University. He also wrote a book called Violent Extremists: Understanding the Domestic and International Terrorist Threat. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor.
Good morning.
So the Buffalo suspect's online posts reference something called replacement theory. Can you explain what that is, and more importantly, where did it come from and how it proliferates?
Well, it's about a century old. One of its earliest manifestations was in France. And basically what it argues is because of immigration and declining white birth rates, that there was a demographic challenge to Western democracy. It's a very racist ideology. It was given new life in the United States by the comments of Tucker Carlson on April 8th of 2021, when he actually accused the Democrats of deliberately trying to bring in immigrants as a way of diluting the white conservative vote. And of course, it made its way down into the sort of swirl of places like 4chan and the dark web, where it's picked up by white supremacists who already buy into this. It's an old neo-Nazi trope. And, unfortunately, this young man read that, got radicalized, and acted on it.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney tweeted yesterday saying that House Republican leadership, quote, has enabled nationalism, white supremacy, and anti-Semitism. You have a piece in The Hill out today, like probably just a couple hours ago, and you wrote, certainly these people, some politicians, some TV hosts are enablers, but you also wrote, they must realize that their rhetoric makes its way into the cesspool of white supremacist chat rooms, websites, and blogs. And when I read that, I thought, well, which comes first? Are they getting, when we hear some of these comments coming from politicians and TV hosts, are they getting it from this online cesspool, or are they encouraging this sort of chatter on these online cesspools?
I think it's moving in both directions. I read a piece that indicated that perhaps the producers of a show actually did troll some of these places to find these ideas. The really important thing, though, is when mainstream media figures and politicians start to echo these ideas, they legitimate them. There are two parts to any terrorist attack. One is a grievance narrative, and we know all about that. These people are unhappy, they feel like they're being marginalized and so on. But the other part is an empowerment narrative, and the empowerment narrative is the thing that tells them, you know what, you're not helpless. You can go out and strike a blow on behalf of the cause. And that's exactly what we've seen. We saw it in El Paso, we saw it in Christchurch, New Zealand, we saw it in Charleston, South Carolina. We've now seen it in Buffalo, New York.
So, Professor, Tucker Carlson on his show yesterday evening pushed back on the criticism that he's received from analysts like yourself and professors like yourself. He called the document, he says, in his view, the document isn't left-wing or right-wing. It's the product, and these are his words, of a diseased and disorganized mind. And you can already start to see the seeds being planted there that perhaps this individual had mental health issues. But the question that Anne-Marie and I were asking ourselves earlier this morning is we rarely ever hear when someone is radicalized online, an Islamist terrorist is radicalized online and then carries out acts of terror, whether here or in France or in Belgium or in Afghanistan, we never have a discussion about the mental health of that terrorist. We only seem to have that discussion here because there's another discussion happening around access to weapons and who should have access to those weapons.
Right.
Why is that? Why do we not point this out as domestic terrorism and talk about this issue that the FBI says is the most significant threat facing the United States today?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. When it's an undesirable other, another group to which we already have prejudice, we tend to generalize the behavior of people like Omar Mateen, who attacked the nightclub, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, and say, oh, he's representative of his entire community, of his entire group. But when it's someone who looks like us, we then fall back in this effort to disaggregate what they're doing, to explain it away, and to say, well, this individual is an outlier. And that's certainly true in one respect. All of these individuals are what we're seeing across the board now. The lone wolf on the fringes of movements, not belonging to a group, striking out and carrying out these kinds of attacks. But you can't separate them from the broader ideology in which they work. And as far as mental health goes, sure, these individuals are maladjusted. Whether they're mentally ill is a question for professionals. But Canada has people like this. Sweden has people like this. They don't tend to have these kinds of attacks. There are exceptions, Anders Breivik in Norway. But generally speaking, there is something else going on in the U.S. and other places that are experiencing demographic change, France, Britain, and so on, that is causing this kind of turmoil to take place.
Right, and you have, after the Pulse nightclub, and former President Trump then decides to implement a Muslim travel ban, right, from people coming from other countries. And when somebody says, well, wait, what about Timothy McVeigh? What about Dylan Roof? What about this individual here who committed these heinous acts over the weekend? That discussion is not as focused as there would be for example, Mr. Mateen.
Absolutely right. And this allows the politicians and the talking heads to have what's called plausible deniability. They can accurately say, well, I never encouraged violence. I never told people to do this. But on the other hand, I think many of them are far too intelligent to not realize that there is a synergy here. There is a connection. And that they are fueling this by making these kinds of bigoted ideas mainstream and much more acceptable. Something like just under half of Republicans and a third of the entire population believes some version of the replacement theory.
Sorry, you just sort of touched on something really quickly. You said, other countries have people who have a grievance narrative or what's an empowerment narrative, but they just, they may walk around and be annoying people and grumpy and the kind of people you don't want to hang out with, but they don't cross the line into violence. And you said there's something happening here. What do you think that something is?
Well, there are a number of things going on. One is a deeply polarized society in which there is not even consensus anymore on objective fact. Fact is what my leaders and the people that I turn to tell me reality is, even if that is not verifiable. The other is the unfettered access to firearms, the ability to convert them to high-capacity magazines that allow a higher rate of fire. And, all of these things together funnel into this.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the responsibility lies with people in power in positions who should know better, who spew out this kind of rhetoric that encourages these young men to do this.
But also, Professor, I mean, you point out something interesting to me, too. Yes, a lot of countries have people who espouse these theories, these racist theories, and yet they don't have access to the firepower that people here in the United States have. But let's remember, this individual was 18. He's 18 years old. I hate to ask what parents and teachers can look out for, but a police official who spoke to our correspondent Jeff Pegues yesterday did say that this young individual slipped through the cracks because he was flagged a year before when he was in high school
for making a threat against his school.
Right. But I, and Anne-Marie and I always say that our parents, I wasn't allowed to have the door in my room, in my house. Like, the door to my bedroom had to remain open at all times.
Same here.
All times. I didn't have a television in my room. I didn't have video games in my room. If I wanted to watch TV,
no telephone in my room
no
either.
telephone. I had to watch TV out in the living room.
Right.
I was a little old. Computers weren't as prevalent when I was a young kid. But I wonder if parents have a responsibility, especially given that this guy is 18. I mean, it's not like he's an adult. Well, he is an adult, but I mean, he's not
living
on his own. Right. I wonder if parents and teachers sometimes bear responsibility for this.
I think they do. And let's remember, he started being radicalized more than a year ago. So he was 17 at the time. He was still a minor. And you're absolutely right. When our three sons were younger, we did not allow them unfettered access to the internet. Now, that's harder to do in this age, but there's no question that we train parents and teachers and youth group leaders and others to look for the signs of suicide, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. Why can't we also train them to look for the signs of radicalization? Because I can tell you, with the number of people who are exposed to these ideas, It's really not possible for law enforcement to catch them all. But the people best equipped to do it are the people who live with them and interact with them on a daily basis. And absolutely right. When in doubt, they should have red flagged this guy. There was enough evidence to say, okay, maybe you're not mentally ill, but let's just err on the side of caution. They didn't do that.
Thomas Mockaitis, thank you so much. We're going to actually be talking to a former FBI profiler to delve a little bit more into the type of person that does something like this. Thank you so much.
Have a nice day.